Hello and welcome to this James the Bike Guy, where today we're getting a chance to take a look at the 2022 Specialized Diverge Sport Carbon. This is the least expensive version of their carbon fiber variants in the Diverge gravel bike lineup. So that's a long way to say that this is the cheap way to buy a Specialized Diverge with a carbon frame. So in this video, we're going to go into features and designs of this bike. We'll talk about what it's all about, and then I'll tell you about the one thing that for some reason this bike doesn't have, yet all the other Diverges do. So if that kind of thing is interesting to you, go ahead and stick around and let's check out this bike as well as find out what it weighs. All right, starting off, let's talk about the Specialized Diverge. So the Diverge that we have in front of us here is now in its third generation. This bike has been around for quite some time, and it was in fact one of the first major manufacturer brands, or models I should say, to come out in the gravel space. You had some of the smaller bike brands making dedicated gravel bikes for a period of time ahead of the big ones. And the big brands were mostly just making conversions of their cyclocross bike. If we go back to the very origination, Specialized had a Crux Evo, which was essentially their gravelified version of their cyclocross bike. And then they came out with the first generation Diverge. And that really changed the game, and it allowed a gravel bike to essentially come into being. Now, when we talk about gravel bike, essentially what we're saying is we've got geometry that is similar to an endurance road bike. So a little more upright in the front end compared to a race bike. It also has a little bit more stable geometry to the bike, but then it has room for massive tire clearance. Now, back in the day, when these bikes came out, 38 millimeters used to be a huge tire, but now today you're getting bikes like this that are coming stock with 42 millimeter thick tires and have room for 47 millimeter tires in a 700C or 2.1 inches in a 650B. Well, anyways, this bike is now in its third generation, which means it's gotten a few updates compared to the prior gens, and a couple of those updates really come into the geometry of the bike. There's also a few comfort things as well we'll talk about in a bit, but first off, the bike has essentially gotten longer and gotten a little bit slacker. So in getting slacker, that means the bike has become a bit more stable. Getting longer means that they can run a shorter stem, a little bit shorter reach to the bike, allowing the steering to still stay nice and accurate. And then throughout the rest of the bike, we're going to get features like this Future Shock 1.5, which allows suspension in the front end. We'll get into a little more. And things like this drop stay to the rear chainstay, allowing additional compliance and flex in the back. And so those features allow this bike to be much more capable on gravel and dirt trails, but also still have some capability for fun, longer road rides, allowing a bike like this to mix that endurance style bike we talked about before with the off-road capabilities of an XC bike for a pretty fun all-around rig for finding adventure. Now, diving deep into the frame, I wanted to talk about this carbon fiber setup and the features that come with it. So the Diverge itself, we talked earlier, has a longer reach and a slacker geometry. And let's start off with our fit. Now, the bike in front of us is a 52, but for prosperity, we're going to talk about geometry numbers in a size 56. So the head tube angle in a size 56 comes in at 71.75 degrees with a stack of 610 and a reach of 392 millimeters. Those then combine with a 425 millimeter chainstay on the bike, allowing the bike to have a pretty good wheelbase setup, nice steering geometry in the front end, and enough room on the frame to be able to open up, have your lungs breathe, that sort of thing. Now, this bike, being the sport level, means that it's going to come with Specialized Fact 8R Carbon. Now, the 8R Carbon frame is significant because in the Diverge series, in the carbon fiber, there's actually 3 different frames. So the most basic, the sport level, comes with the 8R frame. Then when you go comp all the way up to pro, that's going to come with a 9R frame, and then your S-Works variants are going to come with an 11R frame. And as you go up in that frame series, a couple of things change. First off, the carbon layup is going to change, allowing them to make the bikes a little bit lighter the higher end version you go to. You also go through a couple of different Future Shocks, where this one is the Future Shock 1.5, meaning it's going to have compression, allowing additional comfort on the front end, suspending the rider rather than the bike. That allows it to carry momentum pretty well. But on the higher level versions, this Future Shock 1.5 turns into Future Shock 2.0, which gives you a knob on the top to be able to dial it firmer or softer. Here, 1.5 is kind of set it as it is and no adjustment, but it does work really well. And something that's interesting, having owned a Diverge, is you would think that that would start bobbing or that sort of thing when you're pedaling. But in fact, it doesn't, because the fork on this bike is solid. So by putting that above the steer tube junction means that they go from something called splay, which is essentially where the front wheel is traveling in an arcing motion as it goes through or traveling through that suspension. They go to an axial suspension where it's directly straight up and down, allowing the wheels to carry a bit more momentum without having unwanted compression on the front end. Now, this frame does have features like mounts for your top tube bag. You've got frame mounts, you've got fork mounts on the carbon fiber fork, of course through axle front and rear, and in back you've got spots to be able to run fenders or racks on the back end, allowing you the capability to really load this up with the gear that you need. Now, the earlier bit of this video, I said that this is missing one feature that is on all the other Diverge carbon bikes, and if you can spot it, which you can from here, it's missing the SWAT storage box. So I find this is pretty interesting. So comp and above, so the next level up and above, come with a storage box here, which allows you to take your gear, stuff it into the frame, keeping things off of like your saddlebag or having to carry yourself. But I think they're doing this with that 8R frame to help save a little bit of cost, make the manufacturing a bit easier, and then pull a few parts off of the bike, helping lower the cost. Now, the Diverge is a premium carbon gravel road bike, and while this is the least expensive variant, it still comes in at about $3,500. Moving into the drivetrain of the bike, this is going to be a place where it got changed up for 2022, where now it's coming with a 1x SRAM drivetrain. Now, in the 2021 variant, this was a 2x, meaning 2 rings up front with 11 out back of the Shimano GRX group set, whereas today, the 2022 is coming with a SRAM Apex drivetrain with a single ring up front and a super wide range out back. So this Apex drivetrain starts with a 40-tooth narrow wide chainring on this Apex crank going through a threaded bottom bracket, and then it drives out back to a SRAM Apex rear derailleur going through an 11 to 42 tooth cassette. Now, that wide range cassette is going to allow a pretty good breadth of gearing, and then those shift and brake levers mean that the right side is a shifter and the left side is simply a brake lever. So on the right side, you push the button in, 1 click, and that's going to go to harder gear. 2 clicks over goes to an easier gear. They call that a double tap shifter. And then this is also your mount for the hydraulic disc brakes that clamp down on 2 piston calipers and 160 millimeter rotors. Moving into the cockpit of this bike, we can start with the handlebar. This is Specialized Adventure Gear hover bar. What a hover bar is you can see it's got a little bit of rise on the handlebar, and that's allowing you to get a bit more upright position. And then the Adventure Gear hover bars are going to have a bit of flare to it, meaning the bars twisting out to the side, giving you a little more comfort when you are holding down on the brake, little more comfort when you're holding down on the handlebar, where your wrist isn't going to run in to the top of the bar. Now, this bar itself is a short and shallow bar, which means that this bar's drop is going to come in at 70 millimeters and have a reach of 103 millimeters. That flare is then 12 degrees, goes through this aluminum stem, nice and short because of the longer frame reach, and then out back you're perched up on a body geometry power saddle mounted up on a carbon fiber 27.2 seat post. Now I should mention this bike can rock internal cable routing if you get yourself an internally routed 27.2 seat post, so you can add a dropper post onto the rig. Well, the last thing to talk about here is going to be wheel and tire setup, and for that we've got the Pathfinder Pro tires mounted up on a 700C wheel. Now I talked about earlier, this bike does have clearance for up to a 47mm tire on a 700C wheel, or if you opt for a smaller 650B wheel, you can fit up to a 2.1. Now this bike does come with DT Swiss's G540 rims, which is a nice gravel specific rim laced up to some Specialized hubs. And then the tires are the Pathfinder Pro tire, which is a tubeless ready tire coming in at 700 by 42 millimeters, rocking a nice smooth center line and then little bits of knobbies on the side to give some grip when things get loose. Well, anyways, now that we've taken a look at all the features and designs of this bike, I think it's time we go ahead and find out what it weighs. The actual weight of the Specialized Diverge Sport Carbon is going to come in and weigh 21.74 pounds. Thanks for joining me to check out this 2022 Specialized Diverge Sport Carbon. Go ahead and let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. What do you think about that one feature missing versus saving a few bucks over the comp version? While you're at it, be sure to browse the channel and hit subscribe so that way you can see more videos like this in the future.